Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Scump has revealed his opinion on a certain group of CDL players, potentially past and present, that believed they were undroppable from their teams and therefore over time actually became the problem for their franchise. Which players is he talking about here? Is he speaking from some personal experience with his own teammates based on the depth that he goes into? Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty to discuss. Firstly, a remarkable storyline on the Challenger side here. So Crump officially in the building. They made the change a couple of, well, we talked about it yesterday, right? Crump in, Vivid out. Controversial. We'll see if it works for them, but I feel like this was inevitable at some point or another over, you know, either this season or next, that they want to do what Toronto have done, bring in a lot of their quality academy players to their starting team, and that's kind of the point of having the academy at the end of the day. But of course, with Crump coming up to the starting roster, they needed someone to replace him on their SMG line in the academy roster. We know that Doug has been moving from the SMG over to the AR for a while now. I don't really know if that's helped him statistically, but whatever, that's what they want to do, and therefore they needed a new SMG player alongside Pentagram. In fairness, right, Beans and Krem were kind of the hard carries for this academy team. They've now got called up to the starting roster, so, you know, they've got to find someone that is going to potentially replace him to a pretty good level. Now, CDC Intel say yesterday, and this was absolutely blew my mind when I saw this, the new fourth for the Boston Breach Academy is set to be oJhnny. So, you know, this, of course, oJhnny, former player for the Paris Legion last season, was on that team, and there's been a lot of drama over the last 12 months or so between oJhnny and Center. All sorts. Way too much to even cover in this video, but it was then confirmed shortly afterwards by Boston that indeed, with Crump getting called up, oJhnny will be filling in for the remainder of the elite stage. This is absolute madness. I don't know why they've dropped their beef now, but as Doug says, and Doug doesn't even address the beef, which I think is hilarious. Excited to get to work with oJhnny. We have one day of practice before playoffs, gonna make it count. And everyone's like, hang on a second, what? So if you guys aren't familiar, these guys have been beefing for some time now. I did manage to find a Twitter thread here, and as Ben says, you know, typical move from you to actually drop the beef and pick up oJhnny to the team and try and make it work with him. But I mean, yeah, I can't believe this is the case, to be honest. So this was going on way, okay, so this is June 2022 last year, when Doug was constantly calling oJhnny out for being an onliner, basically. Like, he'd be great online, would turn up to LAN, wouldn't do so well. Doug was either saying this guy's straight up onliner, or he's like potentially cheating online and stuff like this. And then oJhnny came back in the replies. Doug was replying on all this stuff because there was basically Doug lent him like $500 or something to go gambling in the Minnesota Rokkr home series. I don't know, and he never paid him back, and Doug was fuming about it. And debt is debt. He's talking to Clayster about this. Clay was defending oJhnny. Doug comes in, and you know, oJhnny and Doug have a bit of a back and forth. And basically, what Doug said was, I think at the time, pay me my $550 back or whatever, and we can drop the beef. But this wasn't the only bit of beef here. They've been beefing for months, right? These two guys have been constantly going at it. It was only a few weeks ago that oJhnny was smoking Doug in scrims or something and was roasting him in the replies for dropping 6 kills. And then, I don't know, absolute madness, to be honest. So anyway, for some reason, that's now done and dusted, and oJhnny is playing with Doug in the academy, so you can't make up some of the stuff that happens in this COD scene. Now, the other storyline I just wanted to mention is I saw a clip last night. Temp doesn't say any more here than is just in the title of the clip here, but basically what he said was that when they dropped Pro Loot, the Vegas guys, before they got too real into the team, they trialed out Kremp, and I believe we heard that rumor at the time that they were trialing Kremp, or there were some other options. But the issue is for Vegas, right, is that Boston obviously wanted a buyout for Kremp, and now Kremp's gone to their starting team anyway, so you can understand why. But obviously Vegas weren't willing to come to any agreement with the Boston Breach, and therefore they kind of wasted those few days of practice, you could say, with Kremp, because Temp said he was very good and was really impressed actually when Kremp stepped into that Vegas team when they trialed him out in place of Pro Loot. But of course Legion didn't want to pay any more money than they had to, so they went and got a free agent, and they've been able to do the same thing now with Standy, and maybe it's going to work out for Boston based on that evidence. Another update as well yesterday is that Ricochet is apparently getting significantly better. It's meant to be getting upgraded. There was this from Charlie Intel, that there's a Ricochet anti-cheat update that will now detect people using controllers with the Cronus software on. Now, you know, it's been a long time coming, you could argue this, and also at the same time, right, you got to wonder, why has this not been a thing for so long? Because Ricochet is meant to work, but it doesn't do anything, especially in like ranked play and stuff. It doesn't seem to do much. There's also this new feature where if you're like if you're suspected to be hacking and well you're shooting at someone, they will just go invisible. Like right here, this is the suspected hacker. You shoot to them and the guy goes invisible. So I think I've seen something like this before, but it's like a cloaking feature basically. So I don't know, they're trying to upgrade Ricochet day, but it's been a big frustrating point. It's the only thing really, well, one of the only things that people are particularly frustrated about in ranked play is that the cheaters are kind of everywhere, unfortunately, for everyone playing the game. Now, I wanted to talk about this Scump situation because this was pretty spicy the other day, and the depth that he goes into here in terms of the details does make me think he's speaking from some degree of personal experience with his own teammates. So Scump said during his watch party, they were discussing the Standy situation, how Standy has gone from being a player on, well, obviously Minnesota Rokkr, when he came into that team during the Cold War season, was incredibly good, his numbers were actually on aBeZy's level quite, okay, the KD wasn't quite the same, I'm pretty sure, but in terms of engagements and damage and impact and stuff, Standy and aBeZy weren't too dissimilar that season in the latter half of the year. Standy was up there for the Rookie of the Year. I would probably marginally give it to Insight, but it was pretty close that season. He stayed on Rokkr going into Vanguard, wasn't particularly good, and then on Toronto this season when he went over there, started off very well, and then quite quickly wasn't necessarily as impactful as he was before. There was some internal conflict and play styles and making bad decisions, left stick mistakes as people say nowadays, on that Toronto team. Then he was dropped from the roster and, well, has since got his chance on the Vegas Legion. Now, Scump was talking about this and saying that there's some players, and maybe Stanley was kind of eking towards this, where he felt like he was the star player of the team. Maybe he was on the Minnesota Rokkr, and therefore you get in this mindset, I suppose, as being a player that feels that they're undroppable, that they're the star player, they're the man that's going to be leading the team, they're the man the coaching staff like and stuff like this, that, you know, you're not going to get dropped, and therefore you get into a headspace and a room of not necessarily improving in the same way that you would before. And Scump says that it's good to see that Stanley hasn't really fallen into that trap, and he is willing to improve and is willing to realize after the Toronto situation that he has got things to work on, and now he's doing exactly that. But Scump, like, the amount of detail he describes here of some players in the league, and he doesn't name names because he doesn't want to get into drama with specific players, but we can feel free to speculate on who he might be talking about here, that certain players felt like they were undroppable, and therefore by the time they did get dropped and went to another team, they realized they only had themselves to blame for this because they actually weren't as impactful or as good of a teammate or as good of a player as they would have been had they not have felt that they were undroppable.
It's good that he's self-aware, you know, because some people, I'm not going to name anybody, but like there's been players before that maybe thought they were, you know, undroppable. You know, they continue their bad habits going into other teams, and then they find themselves just not having any other opportunities, and they're looking around, and there's really nobody else to blame but themselves. But Standy seems to be, you know, leading that charge, maybe making some changes and getting it done with the new Vegas roster with the big win over Boston.
So a very interesting statement from a couple of reasons here. It feels like Scump is probably looking at someone that he might have teamed with in the past, but also we've got to admit that Scump himself for many years was an undroppable character on the team. It was always a discussion that would come up every time, yes, so often, right? Now, Scump was never the problem with OpTic. I think there's no doubt that was never really the case. He was still an incredibly high-level performing player, but because Scump was never going to get dropped, I think there was at times an element where Scump probably could have got a bit harder in practice, could have, maybe he feels differently, but I feel like given Scump was never going to get removed and was never going to go anywhere, he was still trying his best, but he wasn't going absolute balls to the wall maybe every single day because, well, like you would if you were a player like, let's say, Ghosty at the moment who doesn't really know, or Huke at the moment that doesn't really know if they're going to be there for the longer term. So that's one side of the story, but Scump does make a good point about other players that have been incredibly good, and then they, you know, start to feel like there's no way they're going to ever get dropped from the team again, and then they actually start to regress in certain aspects. Now, okay, I was looking at his potential teammates that he could be discussing here, one of which, of course, could be Crim6, right? Now, I don't know if he was talking about Crim, he may not be, but, you know, look, these guys teamed together for a very long period of time, and towards the end of the tenure, the relationship was slightly more strained, certainly in the Black Ops 4 days. They, you know, there was some rumors that, okay, it was Scump, TJ, and Dashy on one side of the equation, Crim, Karma, and TP on the other side that didn't necessarily agree so much, and they had a bit of a falling out, and maybe Crim, you know, maybe Scump feels that Crim, given that he was Crim6, and he still is Crim6, started to feel like he was undroppable, and therefore didn't become as good of a teammate as he did before, and then, well, as Scump would kind of say in his story, when he got to a different team, let's just say, you know, maybe the Dallas Empire in the Cold War days, or even the New York Subliners in the Vanguard days, then maybe Scump thinks Crim realized that he was actually part of an issue. Don't know if he's talking about Crim, though. below. I was wondering also about teammates that he played with in the Huntsman days, because obviously he wasn't really talking about Dynasty stuff. But I was wondering about Gunless, right? Because when Gunless came on the scene in Infinite Warfare, he was, super strong in United and was by far their best player, was getting gassed up all the time by everybody. And then things started to fall apart. He then kind of left the team, benched himself, went to FaZe, and then after that he was still very good, joined the Huntsman guys. There was a falling out there with Envoy, and maybe there's an argument to say that Gunless felt like he was kind of, given he was Gunless, right, and he was the best player in the world at times, at least for a few years in a row, felt like he was undroppable, and now finds himself in a really tricky predicament where he's out of the league and is struggling to get back in right now, Gunless. There was also some talk about Donny Temp. I don't think this really applies at the moment. I think Temp's actually come a long way in the last, let's just say, 18 months or so in being a great teammate. But back in the day, there's maybe an argument that Temp thought that he was, a really good player, one of the best on the team, and was maybe overlooking some of his own flaws as a player, and maybe that came back to bite him at times. So very interesting stuff, and definitely intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. I know a lot of people have said, oh, it's got to be Crim, it's got to be Crim, and maybe that's the case, but fundamentally, I went back and looked at the numbers here. I think, honestly, maybe a hot take, but I feel like Scump splitting up from Crim may really have been a mistake looking back on it, because since Scump split up from Crim and they decided to go their own ways, Scump barely won anything in the last few years. They won one of those, like, home series, and they won another one online, and then they won that event in Vanguard, but apart from that, like, nothing too much happened there. So, I don't know, interesting story. Does this apply, though, to any players presently playing? Because Nameless and Study came up with their player pyramids. I quite like this format, actually, just kind of looking at, well, taking some players that are upper echelon and then going to the very best of the best. This is Nameless's one with Cellium at the top, then aBeZy, Pred, Dashy, Shotzzy, and Simp is here. I feel like I could maybe swap around Simp and Scrappy on this one, to be honest. Then Hydra, Octane, Envoy, CleanX, Donny, Temp, Awakening, Huke, and Sip. So I don't mind this one from Nameless, to be honest. There's a few changes I might make. But, does this concept that Scump is discussing apply to any of these guys? For example, a player like Hydra. I know people have discussed this before. When you're a guy like Hydra, you're the golden boy of the New York subliners. You're not going to get dropped. You are the main man. Like, is there a chance that you ease the foot off the gas pedal a little bit? Are you still as good of a teammate? Are you communicating as well? Are you playing in a way conducive to winning as much as possible, as much as you would have done when you were first into the league and really had to prove yourself? Maybe, maybe not, right? So I think it's a natural thing that occurs with players that are very good indeed and are the star players of their respective teams. But, it's one to monitor for sure. And Scump definitely seems to have some personal experience playing with players that maybe fall into this category. This one was Studies, which this was surprising to me. So he puts Hydra number 1. I don't mind Hydra being high up on this list because I think he is incredibly good. But I wouldn't say he's here right now given the subliner's recent performances. Then aBeZy and Pred, Cellium in the 3rd tier with Shotzzy and Simp. Again, he's got Scrappy and Simp kind of switched around. aBeZy makes his list as well, which I thought was pretty surprising, having out of the 48 players in the league having aBeZy in what is effectively the top 15 or so. And maybe there are a few names here that were missing, maybe there are a few names here that should have still been put on, but definitely intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. Top down, looking at finish. One shot, top down.
Back video done.
Top down still. Top down.
He's in the water. One is in the water. One in the water. Back on me. Back on me. Dead. Nice. Can you move me? Yo, I'm in the back. Oh my god. Get down.
To your right, your right. Jump at him. Nice, good job.
One's behind me, closed, and one's in
Oh, hit him.
I'm getting you. I'll get your front maps.
I got one.
He's topped up. Yeah, topped up weak stuff. Okay, topped up Adrian.
Topped up.
The guy is Zoom.